Bass series, celebrating over 25 years of drum and bass in Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. It is the History of New Zealand Drum and Bass podcast, and joining me on the line right now is one of the hardest working men in the scene. He's been doing it for quite some time. He's a bit long in the tooth now. His name is Trevor, known to his mum as Trevor, but we know him as Trei. How you going, brother?
I'm good, bro. Thanks for that intro. Long in the tooth. I definitely feel it, man.
I tell you what, man, like it's especially like you've been locked down with kids. I've been locked down with kids. There's little patience left for this lockdown.
Absolutely, bro. It's like, it's like if they could do a lockdown but keep the kids at school, that'd be amazing.
I know. How good would that be?
That would just be perfection, you know?
Totally. It's like daddy daycare, just do it somewhere else.
Oh, right, totally. But it's all good. I mean, we do a bit of the home learning stuff and, in the morning, and then I just let them run rampant, basically.
Before we even start, I've got to send a big shout out to your better half, Gina. Big shout out, Gina, mate.
Absolutely.
Hope you're well.
Absolutely, G.
Keeping the boat afloat down there in the Hawke's Bay.
Absolutely, more so than never more than now.
You guys have been busy down there, man. The Hawke's Bay thing has really been popping off over the last couple of years. You guys have put some awesome mahi into building a drum and bass scene, and literally, one of the hardest places you could possibly choose to build a drum and bass scene. It's very rural down there, and. What's it like down there, like putting on those parties? Yeah,
it's definitely changed, man. Like we used to come and try and do gigs here, and it would kind of never really worked, And if it did work, it would sort of everyone would jump in, and they'd happen for a month. This is before we lived here, I'm from here, so I would come back quite often, and then we'd sort of do a gig, and it would sort of work, and then a few others would jump in, and then it would kind of just basically blow its ass out, it would just be too much too soon, too quick. So when we moved here about 6 years ago, we kind of noticed a couple of things changing. Like it used to rely a lot on uni holidays because everyone back then was going to university and stuff, but there's definitely something around now where a lot of people were sticking around and making some money and earning the trades and all that kind of stuff, Right, so it's less reliant on that sort of stuff. And and the great thing about especially people from Hawke's Bay, they're very patriotic, I suppose, like they it's something that they've got here for themselves and they'll look after it, So there's a definite community kind of thing, especially now. And I mean, it's been about 3 years since we've been doing it.
It's like drum and bass, La Cosa Nostra. It's our thing, Hey, it's our thing.
Yeah, it's our thing.
It's our thing. Right, brother. Well, let's jump back into. Let's just go as far back. When did young Trei first discover that he was a dab hand at the music and then drum and bass?
Wow, yeah, that goes back quite a way because I started with guitars when I was a wee tyke, basically, and I remember, this is the kind of around just before grunge kind of popped off. I was just thinking yesterday. The Black Album, I was listening to the Black Album by Metallica, and I was like, man, I still remember that thing, man, and that was 30 years ago, and I'd been playing guitar for a couple of years probably when that happened. And so I was always kind of really focused on being influenced by that kind of stuff, just writing, I was always writing from about the time I was 12, just writing music, and electronic music wasn't even on my radar at all. And then, it was just basically just rocking out for ages with guitars, and then things like 9 Inch Nails and stuff like that started sort of pricking my ears up, and hearing these different sounds and these kind of hybrid, I suppose, situations, and more industrial, I guess, but that kind of stuff.
I think Trent Resnill's got a lot to answer for when it comes to inspiring younger artists, bedroom guitarists to try their hand at electronic music, or even just get a DAW so they can produce themselves.
Yeah, totally, bro. Like get themselves buried in their own studio, which is something that he still does,
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's kind of, I guess that kind of started that, because then from that, then sort of natural, I guess, progression went to things like Prodigy and Chemical Brothers and stuff like that, which kind of had that, I suppose, rock energy to it.
Absolutely.
But in a very different way. So that sort of tweaked my interest into electronic stuff. And me and a mate sort of just threw a whole lot of whatever money we had, which wasn't a whole lot, and bought a whole lot of outboard gear and just decided to try and set up a band room. We moved to Auckland, set up a band room with some synths and a PA and all that kind of shit, and just jammed out and sort of, I suppose, tried to learn how it all kind of worked. And then around about that time, I had mates that were really into techno and like Jeff Mills and and all the Swedish guys like Adam Bayer and all that kind of
The
stuff.
good shit.
Yeah,
The
hard
real
out,
good
man.
shit.
And so I was really into that, and then it sort of went that way. And then from that, I remember hearing New Forms, and that's when it got me. That's totally when drum and bass got me. It's still to this day.
The album,
Yeah, bro, 97, I think it was.
yeah, 97, Ronnie Size, Represent, New Forms. For anyone out there listening who's wondering what the hell we're talking about, just go and search that out on Spotify.
Oh, if you have never heard that, go check it out, man. Because I'm
One
not
of the
saying
most
that's-
life-changing albums
Yeah,
for anyone who's
absolutely,
producing
bro.
drum and bass at the time, you know?
Yeah, man, and Goldie had been around a couple of years, and there'd definitely been drum and bass around, Doc Scott and all those guys. But New Forms was the one that really made me go, fuck, man, this has got something, And then once you start sort of delving into it a bit deeper, and then you discover other things, then out of even that, Ronnie, just that sort of crew, you've got, Dye and Crust and
Suv
yeah, and
and-
all that kind of
yeah.
thing, man. And it just, honestly, I still buzz out when I think about it. I just got so into it, and that's kind of started me, sort of pushed me along the drum and bass route. And then you discover like your Ed Russian Opticals and Bad Companies, and I believe Bulletproof was in there somewhere, like
Mate, Bulletproof was, they were our biggest inspirations for sure, 100%. That was that whole sound that came between 98 and 2000.
yeah, and Conflict
was-
and all that kind of stuff, eh?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. That was us. Once we discovered that, it was over.
Yeah.
That's all we wanted to make was that sound, and far out. Like, takes you a long time to get there. Looking back, it takes you a very long time to get there.
Yeah, big time, man. The days of the baggy jeans and the that whole skaters
Yep.
and baggy jeans and stuff. But man,
Carl Carney shorts and jeans and
Yeah, bro.
just
it was like honestly,
funny as well.
That was the time. That was the time that it really tweaked me. And I was a bit kind of shy, I suppose, back then. And I kind of, I'd go to, I think when we lived in Auckland, it was called the Breaks, and it was at
Yep.
Herzog, and that was that
Yes.
a Subtronics one.
Yes, it was. It was
Yeah.
Jeff Pressure, DJ Aaron, 48 Sonic, and Riddle.
And Riddle.
With a few,
Yeah, bro.
a few guests here and there.
And that's-
that was the seminal night,
Yeah, totally. I remember they had all those. Oh, what were they? All those dolls, like the Virgin Mary dolls and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Real
It was a
concrete-looking
cool
bar.
club.
Yeah, it was so.
It was a cool club. It was a weird shape and it was a weird dance floor. It was like a really big ink bar, but
Yeah,
yeah.
and it had.
Originally, that club night used to be done at Calibre, which is people might know as Whammy Bar in Auckland now, and that was a Thursday night that people would travel all over the country to go and check it out.
Absolutely, yeah. That was the thing. I mean, we had mates that would come up from Hawke's Bay to do, to come and check these gigs out. That's when Groove Rider and that were coming out, and Goldie I think was coming out about then. That's I think going on to the New Zealand drum and bass stuff. That's where the exposure hit, because the connections between New Zealand and those massive UK artists to us were, like
Our heroes.
Yeah, absolutely, man. They were just,
Yeah.
it's crazy. But then there they are right there, in their small little clubs.
Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking about that earlier. As like, people would call it fanboying these days, but back in those days, I've said it in most of the podcasts I've done in the series already, that those guys, because we didn't have access to them the way that we have access to artists now, those guys, there was a mythical, folklore-y kind of aura around these artists, because,
100%.
you had to place yourself in their studio when they're making that sound, and if you're just starting to produce, you're like trying to reverse engineer everything that they've done, and
Yeah, bro, big
just you hold them in such high esteem. It's fucking crazy. But nowadays you got access to your fucking favorite artists at the click of a finger.
Yeah, and their processes and like in the way and their patches and all that kind of stuff. Back then, man, it was like, it was still like Akai samplers and shit like that. It was
Yeah, absolutely.
it was like quite a mission to get anything even somewhere close to what they were doing.
It was a lot of development. It was like I've told the story as well. It's like Dillinger was the first one. He's like, get the Emu sampler, it'll change your life. And we got the E5000 Ultra, we got the Scuzzy outs, we got the 16 out upgrades, and that was it. It literally, like within 2 or 3 weeks, our sound changed, and you wouldn't be able to distinguish it between a track written in New Zealand and a track written in the UK.
Yeah.
And that's what we were all striving for back then as well, was to
Absolutely.
sound exactly like the guys from the UK.
Yeah, definitely, man. And that's just that whole, the fact that in terms of, they were right there, like in terms of proximity, I guess that's a big part of how it all kind of developed here as well, was that proximity, because the whole scene was so connected.
Yeah.
Promoters
totally.
bringing these, Subtronics bringing them over, then obviously, I mean, for me being in Wellington by that time, I got, I suppose, access in terms
totally.
of giving a CD to Clute or Digital or those kind of guys. And it was,
and that was literally
buzzy.
it, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was like you had to go to the gig, and if you wanted to meet these guys, you could literally rock up and give them a CD while they were playing. I remember Clute playing at Studio 9 in Wellington. I think I was there.
Yeah, totally.
And, we used to pilgrimage from Christchurch up because sometimes those gigs wouldn't make their ways down to Christchurch because the venue was either booked out or it was just a 2-day tour that they were able to do. So they'd get like Auckland and Wellington. So we'd travel up, catch the ferry across, no accommodation or anything like that. We'd just fucking rave all night and then fucking sit around at the ferry terminal and catch the ferry back home to Christchurch. We'll make our way back down to Christchurch from Picton.
Via D-Dogs.
Via D-Dogs after a good
Shout out to
session
D-Dog.
kick on, Shout out D, the absolute lead. Shout out DJ Sal. Shout out all the crew from Wellington from back in the Bass Frontiers days.
Absolutely. I mean, for me, that's where I was helping out with sound at Studio 9 with my old mate Steve Frisbee. And that really kind of linked me into that, and then obviously from CDs, and then you get the AIM handles and stuff, and they were like gold.
Yeah,
remember?
Yeah, I know, bro. I know.
Like
me and Pat were talking. We were laughing about how sometimes you go to bed, you had a really shit connection, you go to sleep, and you'd leave it on open receive so that everyone could send you tunes overnight. But then you'd wake up in the morning, and there'd be a whole list of failed tunes.
Oh, I know. And then you were too
failed
too
transfers.
shy to ask if they could send it again, kind of thing.
I know.
Sort of take you 3 days to work up the courage.
Had to do. Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
but
awesome. But that's the thing. I guess it was very organic the way that it kind of all unfolded. The way that's just that. Then you had you'd have a conversation with Andy C or something like,
totally.
man, that tune's fucking badass, and you're like, oh shit, I thought you're just sitting in your cave. Back you couldn't like load it on USB or anything like that. It was all vinyl days. You know?
I remember being way too nervous to even try and talk to the guys, and if I did, I'd fall over myself. I'd trip over my words. I remember saying to Doc Scott, I was like, how would you describe drum and bass? And I just mentioned that I was seeing a Brazilian girl. He's like, one word.
Marquee.
Brazilian girls. I was like, okay, cool.
Yeah, bro.
It's just like taking the piss out of me completely because he could spot someone stumbling over their words,
Yeah. And to me, that was the thing. It became like it was so worldly. Do you know what I mean? Like everyone that come over. I remember when Marky first came over, and he came over with Brian G, I think. So everyone was going to see Brian G, but no one really knew who Marky was because LK hadn't dropped or anything like that yet, I don't think. And then he came on and just slayed it, man, like scratching and shit everywhere. And everyone was like, motherfucker, like, this guy's badass. But then, you had all that kind of, and then you had like conflict from Scotland. You obviously had all the English guys as well, but you started seeing that there was, and the Hungarian guys coming up as well, and Austrian guys. Like it was a real movement happening. And
I was saying, like, I think the rapport between us and Conflict as well came from the fact that those guys, even though that they were in Glasgow, they still didn't feel like they were part of the UK drum and bass scene because it was a very closed off scene in those days. You know what I mean? Like, then you get on Renegade Hardware and that's your foot in the door, and then you start releasing on other labels and shit like that. But until that time, you kind of feel like all the doors are shut and it's a very us scene, like they kind of were protective of that music because it came from there. They created it,
Absolutely, yeah, totally.
Once all those younger artists started coming from, like, the Conflict with the first generation of international artists outside of Britain per se, to really come through, and then you started noticing like the Diesel Boys and that coming from America and fucking Hive and all them lot. So it wasn't long before New Zealand sort of got its foot in the door as well. There was ourselves and Concord Dawn and started making moves. But then, there was a whole other influx, new generation of producers like yourself, State of Mind and Upbeats that all rolled through sort of those early 2000s eras and started really fucking turning heads overseas, which was awesome. So that's leading me into my next question is, when did you get your first sort of international interest in the music that you were making back in those days?
Do you know what? The first one was quite a funny one. I got an AIM message from Riddle, and I was like, and I didn't know Riddle that well. I don't think we'd ever met face to face for maybe a year or something, but just on the AIM stuff, And then he's like,
for those people that don't know, DJ Riddle is you've heard us talking about the Christchurch scene. Riddle actually started in Christchurch and then moved up to Auckland and became part of the Breaks crew. He's easily one of the sharpest selectors in the country. He could mix and blend tunes together, roll them out. He's he was an absolute icon of early drum and bass in New Zealand. He did shows on George and all sorts of shit back in the day.
Mate, he was firing.
That's
he was
that's who DJ Riddle is.
Yeah, totally.
Anyway,
and so
back to it.
he was in part of that, the Subtronics vibe, and all, the guys that were bringing things over. But he was more on the DJ side, I guess, from where I was standing anyway. But yeah, I'd sent him a tune. I'd done like a warning bootleg. I didn't realise it was a bootleg at the time. I just got the vocal and wrote a tune around it, And he's like, mate, who else have you sent this tune to? And I'm like, oh, I don't know, a couple of people, I name, And he's like, well, check this out. It's 6 minutes and 13 seconds. And it was Andy C. I don't even know what it was at. It was some big show he was doing back there. I don't know, that was 2005 maybe, something like that.
Oh, so he used to do Radio 1 in residency.
Yeah, it was something. It may have been a Fabric thing. I'm not too sure what it was, but it was something like that anyway. And I was like, bullshit. He's probably got it wrong, And then I heard the vocal coming into the mix, and I'm like, nah, it's probably someone else who's used that vocal. And then I heard it, I was like, holy shit, he's playing that fucking tune, man. Like, and yeah, that was the first moment that it just kind of floored me, going, how has that even happened, Like, where I knew full well I'd sent him the tune, but I never in a million years thought it would be that, especially that early in a set,
Yeah, it must have been.
Yeah, that was
fucking
trippy.
Inspiring. It's Andy C, right?
Yeah, totally. And there was no like conversation about that. It just happened, and luckily Riddle heard it. Otherwise, I still probably would never have known. But yeah, then after that, I think then Johnny Random got hold of me. Random Recordings.
Yep.
And
shout out Random.
Yeah, man, Johnny Random. And then I did a couple of 12s for him. And that was...
We're actually label mates on Random Recordings.
Yeah, that's right, man, because he'd done it.
Yeah.
He'd had a few things out. I think Agent Elvin had put some stuff out with him as well.
That's right. Yeah.
And yeah, so that was big to me, man. That was the first vinyl. That was like, I remember getting the white label of it and going, oh man, this is just buzzy, And that those couple, that was Big Mouth and Cat Scratch and a couple of other things. And then I think from then I'm just trying to think what the next release was. I think may have been Valium Express, which that was Commercial Suicide.
Right.
So that was the Clute connection straight
Link up.
away, and that went really well with myself and Menace and Dose.
I think I wore the CD of Valium Express out, bro. I played that tune so much.
Yeah, man, it shocked the shit out of me how well that went. That was huge, man.
Yeah, man.
So that happened, and then of course that started the Commercial Suicide sort of link up, and from that it kind of grows and evolves exponentially from that, because then once you're out on a label with that kind of prestige, you got people asking for tunes all over the place, as you know, bro.
Yeah,
so
man.
it's that's when it really started kicking off for me,
I think, for when someone like Clute picks you up, and especially back in those days as well, it did. When we signed Hardwired to him, that was it. We took off. We were getting bookings and shit like that, you know what I mean? Like inquiries into about whether or not we're going to be touring UK or the US anytime soon. It was like, holy shit, one tune on one label, you can...
put a tour together. You can go,
away.
like, I'd never been out. I think I'd never been outside of Australasia, and then all of a sudden, a couple of tunes released, and me and Dosey are off on tour. And
Dose. Shout out Dose.
Yeah,
I've got to
Dose.
get Dose on this podcast, mate.
I'll do
Dose's story is so underrated, mate. Like, I know he's just kind of tapered off from producing and become a banker or whatever it was, but some of the music that he made. I mean, he was the first Kiwi artist on Ram Records, and just some groundbreaking
Correct
shit
and all that sort of stuff, like that whole Correct crew in Christchurch.
I mean, this is exactly why we're doing this podcast, so that these stories can be out there and immortalized in history, you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally, bro. Yeah, that's a fucking great idea, because, I mean, that's the thing.
We've got a lot of fucking people to get through, trust
totally,
me.
bro. Totally, mate. Like, that's the thing. It's like, and it's great. We're all still mates. We're all still family, like this whole...
Yeah, I know.
A lot of time's gone by, man, but...
A lot of time has gone by, and that's what I think one of the things I was talking about with Talia as well is that, we are down here, this is us, we built this, you know what I mean? This is our scene, and I mean, I stopped producing drum and bass nigh on 11 years ago, but I still fuck around playing with it. I like the idea of creating tunes and getting that vibe going, but when you listen to what is popular now and listen to what you're making from your heart and going, well, do I even bother finishing this? You know what I mean?
It's a very different. It's a different landscape now, man. But I was thinking about this earlier too, knowing I was coming on the podcast. There's something to be said about it. It's never seen drum and bass in New Zealand has never seen a bigger time than, say, last year. I mean, it's still big now, but it's sort of really kicked off.
Absolutely.
And before COVID, it was getting big anyway, and then COVID kind of essentially lent itself to drum and bass in the sense that when we came back out, we were all ready to go.
Yeah, and not only that, there was about 1 million bedroom DJs that were now booking gigs and taking festival bookings and all sorts of
Oh,
shit
big
from
time,
doing
man.
their Twitch live streams and everything like that, you know. So,
Yeah.
I mean, as much as it was painful to see every single thing in your feed coming up as a Twitch live stream, it was also great for the scene because, you know, unearthed
And
a
I
lot of
think
new talent. And
that's the thing to me is like that talent's all it's like it's really important to do these kind of podcasts because it's built on the shoulders of other shoulders. You know, this hasn't just sort of popped up and all of a sudden drum and bass is big in New Zealand. I mean, you know, I think that people really need to be aware of how long this has been going. You know, at any level. Do you remember?
yeah, I did mention that to someone. I did mention that to someone about this podcast was that, I'm going to be taking it right back 25 years. And they were like, what, 25 years? I was like, yeah, drum and bass in New Zealand started in 1995, pretty much around the same time as the London scene, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and it was the bastard child for like a decade of house music gigs.
It
You know,
was.
it was a tiny little, smallest little stage
Absolutely.
in the corner, and you'd only get, you know, the dirtiest of fucking heads in there, and it was fucking awesome, man. But that was
Half a working sub and one tweeter,
Yeah,
and you're
bro,
away.
but
It
it
was a
was
drum
just-
and bass party back in the day.
and we were all still in it. We were all still, you know, we were so into it. That was just the vibe that we had, and that's the thing. You know, like you say, it goes back so long, and it's all it's just consistently built. It's just been on this incline up, you know, and then we're at this point
and it's
now.
been massive ebbs and flows as well, right? Massive ebbs and flows.
Oh yeah, dubstep
Like,
really hurt it. I remember that coming along.
It really, really did. And not only that, it was just the music kind of took a hit here and there as well, you know what I mean? Like the quality of music that was coming out wasn't as, I don't know, like a lot of just, it seemed like at one stage everybody could make drum and bass, and next thing everybody could own a record label. But and then once everything started getting digitized and streaming started happening, literally every bum and his brother was making drum and bass and releasing it, and it was just flooded full of crud. You know what I mean?
Yeah, big time, man. And that was the thing.
Not taking away anything from those producers for like going out there and putting their music out there. Like that's not what I'm saying. But like as far as us go, we New Zealand especially producers, we had high standards as far as our productions went. If you listen back to all the back catalogues of New Zealand productions, they're all fucking top tier music. You know what I mean?
And it came back to that whole, like we were saying about having heroes so in such a close proximity, because you couldn't just let it go by if it wasn't good enough. You know, like you were measuring against the best in the game. And you still are, essentially. But like you say, just the way the world's moved now with technology and stuff like that, there's so much more accessibility, which means that, you know, when we were doing it, I buzz out that I'm still doing it now. You know, it was never like part of a plan to be still doing it now.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. You're one of the most prolific producers from the country. You've probably released more music worldwide than most other artists, like because of your link ups with Viper and Friction and all that lot. Like I just remember there was like a 3-year period where it was like every fucking couple of months there was a brand new Trei single out on one label here or one label over there, and then you're off over touring and you were away for X amount of time flying the flag for New Zealand on the global stage. It was fucking mad to watch, bro.
Yeah, it's honest, and when I think about it like that, it's crazy, bro. It really came off the back of a couple of tunes, and then I suppose just keep populating that area. And I suppose that's even more. It's probably more relevant now when you think of Spotify streams and all that kind of thing. It's even more a thing. But back then, it was. I mean, it wasn't even that far ago. Like to me, it's always been. I remember because we come from a place where release on a new label was like getting a new badge in some way.
Absolutely.
You know, like you were kind of collecting badges.
Absolutely.
And, you know.
And there's a few badges that are missing from my little vest, trust me. Like I wanted to release on Metalheads, I wanted to release on Ram Recordings, I wanted to release on Virus, almost got there.
Yeah, oh man, I'm surprised I didn't get Virus. But yeah, bro, absolutely.
Man.
There's definitely a few that I haven't nabbed yet either. But I know that's part of the journey though as well. I think you've always got to have things to me, you've always got to aim higher than you're at. Because otherwise, what's the point? You know, like you've got to have things you're striving for that essentially are unattainable in your head. Yeah. But if you're aiming and focusing towards that, then you're going to get further than you would if you weren't at all. You know,
from my perspective, for you, like you've uncompromisingly kept your sound through the years, you know what I mean? It's not like you've tried to make something to fit onto a certain label or anything like that. If you listen to a Trei tune or if you hear a Trei tune in the dance, you know that's a fucking Trei tune, you know what I mean?
Awesome, man. Yeah. It's funny, when you're in it, you don't know it. You definitely don't know it. yeah, I mean, you know, I don't know if you're the same, but I can't hear when. One thing I do remember, like touring Europe, when I started touring Europe and stuff, and you get the Europeans would sort of be like, "Man, you guys, what is it about the Kiwi sound?" And I'd be going, "What do you mean, man? Like we all sound completely different." And they're like, no,
Yeah.
you've got something. You guys have got this thing.
I've had this convo. Yeah, I've had this
and I'm
convo.
like, do you know, I think when I think about it, say when the first comes to mind at that point in that era would be like State of Mind, Upbeats, yourself, Concord, and we were kind of all into metal. There was like a rock edge to it.
Bro, we all come from grunge backgrounds
totally.
or rock backgrounds or a guitar background. Like, you know, like Tiki and I met each other at 15 years old, both in the Christchurch grunge scene. You know
Totally,
what I mean?
man. And I think it's still relevant. I remember going to the Slayer and Anthrax gig. It was a couple of years ago.
Exactly.
And that was me with Shifters and Tiki and Evan and Maddie. You know, it just showed me that I guess that's what they're talking about when they talk about a Kiwi sound, is that it had this essence of rock, you know, whereas it's not necessarily that we were out going and putting guitars all over everything. It just had this energy to it.
Well, actually, Evan was.
Yeah,
but, you know.
totally. Evan totally was. But yeah, man. I think
and it worked.
But yeah, it's So to me, it's I suppose going back to how I write, I never I don't often, like, to me it comes from an idea out of my head, and then I'll quickly hit a guitar because I can get it to sound how I want to. I'm not the greatest with synthesis. It takes me fucking weeks to make something
sound design's painful.
Yeah, like to make it sound like I want it to sound in my head. So when I notate it, it's either humming it or hitting a guitar on it, you know, like that kind of thing. So I guess there's an essence there that there's always musicality. So that's the thing that I always try to put it, whether it's a real hard tune or a real light tune or, you know, anything. There's always got to be some sort of. I think Maddie Concord once said, "You don't walk down the street whistling a snare drum, do you?" You know. You know, and
it's such a Maddie C thing to say.
Absolutely, man. It stuck with me, and that's really it to me. It's always got to be, to me, memorable music is something that just pops into my head. You know.
Yeah, totally.
And so that's to me the bar.
There's a lot of timeless music that's come out in New Zealand as well, which is, I think, you know, there's a lot of kids who like hear this podcast and we're mentioning some of these names and they're like, oh, I remember my brother or sister listening to that CD or, you know, talking about that gig and shit. There's some timeless music that came out of New Zealand, and especially during that era as well.
Yeah,
but I think the further east you get when you're on tour in Europe, the bigger the Kiwi sound gets. It's fucking weird, bro. Like I found myself playing in some of the weirdest places like Cluj-Napoca in the middle of fucking Romania, like Moldova, fucking just
Did
Hungary.
you do Belarus
like,
as well? You did. Yeah,
did Belarus.
I remember speaking to you at one point. You're like, I'm in Minsk.
Yeah, I'm in Minsk. But the thing is, I'm fucking jealous. I said this to Pat as well. Jealous of you guys because you guys all managed to link up with Rita. I think I was sort of bowing out of the scene and just discovered dubstep at this time. But fucking you guys all managed to do those massive raves in Moscow and St. Petersburg and places like
the Pirate
that.
Station ones. I never ended up getting one of those, but that was absolutely on my radar. That was something I was gunning at.
The World of Drum and Bass or some shit.
Yeah, that was the one. I think SS runs that, But I think Rita had a lot to do with that as well. But man. So that was, I think, my first non-English speaking country was in Russia, landing in Moscow, and it was a gig for Rita, and me and Chris Sue were playing it. So obviously Chris Sue had been over here touring and stuff. So, you know, again, it brings that kind of international link up together, and it's just bros in this crazy old town,
totally.
you know, like.
And it helps a lot when you got like Greg Mindscape was my guy, and Attila as well. Like it was like they kind of would come on, you know, if I was playing around Hungary or playing next to a country that's next to Hungary, they'd sort of come with me and fucking hang out. And it was nice to have someone on tour because Josh was never a DJ. The other half of Bulletproof was never a DJ. Never had any interest in wanting to come overseas and fucking go touring with me or anything like that. So
he never did any of the tours.
No way. None at all, man. He was more than happy just to sort of just chill and make beats.
Right, the tunes. I mean, it can be. Touring's definitely not for everybody. That's you know, something.
Oh, Josh's thing came from being able to stand in the crowd and knowing that tune that was being played right there, he was on the buttons for. You know what I mean? Like I think that was where the satisfaction came from. For
and
him.
an instant quality control too. You know, for the two of you as a duo. You know, when you're playing it, it's harder to hear it like that. Whereas you're
totally,
out the front, you know?
totally.
Yeah, epic.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, those kind of days, the touring and stuff like that. Yeah, that's it's still trippy, man. I was obviously with COVID, that's not happening at the moment. But that's something I think COVID's kind of lent itself to us to focus more on New Zealand, because before COVID, it wasn't really. I mean, it's not that New Zealand wasn't a factor, but like Pat, he'd be touring Europe 3 times a year. Dylan would be over in the UK playing heaps of shows. From living in London and stuff, and it was just
Maddie C living in Vienna.
Yeah, exactly, man. And then for me, the States was about to start opening up and all that kind of thing. So it's COVID's kind of stopped all that in its tracks, but it's then made us all sort of push back and focus a bit more on here.
Has it stifled your creativity in any kind of way?
I definitely have ups and downs with it. Like it's it's such a intangible thing to kind of, I suppose, express in words. Like you just have days, weeks in lockdowns and this is, I really feel for the UK guys that they've only been out 5 or 6 weeks now.
Oh my God, mate! And I feel like they're going to be back in the shit real soon too. So
I'm definitely keeping an eye on it, man. It's a bit dicey, but yeah, I mean,
it's hard. I had a lot of friends from over there reaching out while they saw all of us hanging out at festivals over summertime. It's kind of like I didn't want to really engage with them on that level, because it's like, I don't want to rub this shit in your face, because you've had it twice as bad as us over twice as long.
Same one, bro. Like, when we were doing the New Year stuff, when we Friction and that had come over, and it was definitely chatting about, man, how much do you post of what's going on here when everybody else isn't able to do it, like are you there was 2 schools of thought. Are you rubbing it in, maybe best not to, or do you want to just show people that it's still possible, and that kind of ended up being the one that won.
Yeah, totally. And also, like, with those guys coming out here, Subfocus, Dimension, Wilkinson, fucking Eddie Friction, it's when that was going down, they were the only UK drum and bass DJs anywhere in the world touring. Yeah. And they were only coming here, you know what I mean?
Like 20,000 people fucking festivals and shit,
Yeah.
Mental.
And for that reason, it kind of elevated them to the absolute top tier of drum and bass producers for the current time, because they were the ones who were able to get content, create all that, bring their videographers with them, get all that footage, make promo around their new releases and all that sort of shit. Like I saw what Subfocus did on the release of the Remixes LP and just really clever shit that was unable to be produced while they
could keep the wheels turning. That was the big thing, I think. Totally. I mean, even then, they'd go back and they were going back into lockdowns. That was the thing. They'd be out for 3 or 4 weeks and then home to do more of the same kind of thing.
And bro, the dedication to spend 2 weeks in quarantine in New Zealand to be able to play a few shows. And I'm sure that in itself
would wreak havoc on your brain as well, like...
I know, man.
I mean, that's the thing, like, I've had moments... I remember when we first had a lockdown, I remember walking out to my little cave, it had just been announced or something like that, and I walked out, because shit was so crazy at that time, it was getting crazy anyway, like, for me with getting tours organised and over in Europe, and then the States thing was popping up, and then obviously having things here in New Zealand, and then when that happened, it was just a bit of a clusterfuck. And I remember walking out to the studio just thinking and feeling the weight off my shoulders going, man, I needed this more than I thought.
Yeah, I think that was a lot of producers went through that as well. They're like, you know what? Here we are.
You get stuck I'm wondering otherwise.
Exactly. I'm wondering whether or not the Upbeats album, the latest one that's come out, is a result of them being in a lockdown sort of environment, or if it was produced after that, because I don't know, like that album to me is the Upbeat's best album yet. You know what I mean? We're
brilliant music on it, and I think you can definitely. There's always like a longing when you hear the album tunes of those guys. There's always like the part of the vibe of their, I suppose, ethereal kind of sound is to me is like a longing, especially when Dylan's singing.
Yes,
and I think that really translates to this whole. Dylan being stuck in London and Jeremy still here, and how do you get it all together? And I mean, I think you can kind of hear that in that album, which is awesome, man. That's what music should be about,
Yeah, totally. I was like, and those two are best friends as well. So it's like to not have Wolf with Snake or Snake with Wolf. It just doesn't compute.
Yeah, totally.
You know what I mean?
Totally, man. I'm sure, like from a writing perspective with them in the studio, because they vibe out, man. When those two are together, I've written tunes with them.
Totally.
And they just bounce off each other, man. It's just kind of whatever I write with them, it's kind of me in the back seat. The other reason is that I don't know how to drive Logic, so I sort of sit back.
Oh yeah,
and just pipe up every so often.
Third wheel to Amazing Bromance.
Yeah, bro, totally. But yeah, man, I think the lockdown stuff is definitely it's up and down. Like this latest one, it's, man, I've had the first week I was I was like a little kid going, fuck yeah, awesome. And not awesome for everybody, obviously, because of the COVID thing, but just for me and myself, I was just like, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I kind of needed it again. And then, but yeah, even in the last sort of week or so, I've just been like, just had dull days. That's kind of, I guess, the best way to describe it. They're not down days, they're just kind of nothing days.
Yeah. I mean, Tali and I were talking about our mental health before, and like, you know, what COVID has and the effect it takes on it, the effect it takes on your creative output, and even just your will to fucking drag your ass out of bed in the morning when you really know you don't have to if you don't want to.
Yeah, totally, man. And I think it's part of the up and downs of performing as well. You know, like you get to, you've always got this thing in front of you. Like for me with shows and stuff, I'm always got something in front of me that I'm like, fuck, yeah, okay, you know, I've got to get my brain in the game for that. You know.
So how many shows have you lost through this one
5.
lockdown? Fuck me days. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Bro. That's a lot of work.
Yeah, it was just a big. I was just sort of. I just done just a week before we went in lockdown. I just done my first 2 gigs out because I'd taken I'd on purposely given myself a break, just to get more into the studio. You know, like just to really focus and hone in on music. And then went out, did a couple of shows. I think I did Auckland and Owakuni, and then a few days later we're in a lockdown, and I'm like, far out. I wish that happened when I'd forced my break. So and then it wouldn't have been such an issue. But yeah, it's fine. Like we're so fortunate here in New Zealand that we're looked after. You know, we can get by. It's just a pause. It's not a, you know, you've just got to kind of keep reminding yourself. It's just, you know, we could be in much worse situations.
Hell yeah, definitely. We could have been locked down for the last year and a half.
Yeah, exactly, man. I mean, to do it for a couple of weeks and get back on top of it, learn a few more lessons because of that. Then I feel like it's the right thing to do, as much as it's a pain in the ass. But and it definitely hits you in the head a few times for sure.
Yeah,
because that's what it's going to say. You know, there's that old elation of playing, but that you take that that really drives you towards the next. You know, getting tunes ready for this to test on this gig and all that kind of stuff. Well, if you take that away, then it's almost a little bit like it feels pointless at the time when you have those dull moments. You know.
Yeah, man. And we all made tunes to play at clubs. You know?
Yeah, totally.
Or festivals. Well, speaking of making tunes, there are and it's fucking impressive, there are quite a few awesome new acts coming out of Aotearoa. What's your take on the current state of the production scene at the moment?
It blows my mind. Like I feel like I'm chasing all the time, you know, like, you know, especially like the Lee Matthews guys, Florida's guys. You see what they're up to at the moment and what they're putting out. It's awesome, man. Like the production level just steps up, and I guess that's, you know, technology stepped up, and there's all these other things. You know, it's just constantly chasing it, but that's a good thing because, you know, for people like us,
absolutely,
it gives us more to be focused on, to learn, to move forward. You know, so.
Yeah, well, there's never been any resting on your laurels as a Kiwi drum and bass producer. You gotta, you know, if you hear something new and the sound's shifting and evolving, you are constantly trying to challenge yourself to keep up.
I've said that, and I've said that.
And I feel like
I've said that before. Like, there's always been this thing, especially I know from where I'm standing, and I'm sure it'll be the same for like Beat State of Mind yourself. Like, there's always. I mean, when Dead Limit came out, you know, and I would guarantee that State of Mind and yourselves and Maddie and that we're all probably sitting there going, fuck, how do we make something that fucking big?
Yep.
You know, like, and it's
totally.
Like we're family, but it's like a competitive edge to it as well.
Oh, it has to be, bro. Like we all kind of would. Well, I think like a lot of the time, like especially when I was coming back from sort of taking a sabbatical and being a dad. When I came back and I started working with Pat and Stu and started working with the Upbeats and Maddie and even again, half of it was me just scoping out their setup and just trying to catch up on the new techniques. You know what I mean? Because 2.5 years goes by in drum and bass. That's almost like a lifetime. You know what I mean? As far as production goes.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's the thing. But I think that's a big strength as to why things have remained so solid for so long. Is that we're all just quietly competitive with each other, you know, but supporting each other as well. You know, I think there's no like resentment or anything. Just go for it, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. It was the same with us as DJs in the 90s. Yeah. Like, we were uber competitive because if you had the tunes, people would come and hear you play, because if you've got something that they want to hear, they'll happily pay the money to get into the club and hear you play that one record and maybe rewind it 3 or 4 times and fucking, you know what I mean? I remember when Messiah came out and I just got back from just got back from London. I had it on dubplate, and fucking Jeff had it on dubplate. It was test press or whatever. He had the vinyl copy, and he played it 6 times in a row. That huge atmospheric build up for Messiah. And as soon as it dropped, he'd rewind it, and he did it 6 times in a row, but not a single person left. They wanted to hear that fucking build up and that drop and just fucking experience it.
Because you couldn't hear it anywhere else.
Like,
you couldn't just dial it up on YouTube.
You could not. You could not hear it anywhere else.
You had to be at the gig to hear that tune. You know, like even going back to like LK and shit like that. You know, like you knew that there was only a tier of artists that had that, and because that took a year and a half or something from the time I first heard it till it came out. And I remember, and the only way you could ever hear that was if you went to a gig, and you'd have to go pretty much to any international gig because you would hope that they had the dub plate, you know, like that kind of thing. And I still remember like when Jeff had Samurai. So big up Pressure. I think he's a big, for me, he's a big...
I'm actually recording him on Tuesday.
Oh, awesome, man. Make that a couple hours long. That'd be awesome stories.
I know that's probably one of the ones I'm looking forward to the most, just because of his history, not just in drum and bass, but everything that he's fucking done, from skateboarding through to fucking death metal, through
death metal bands,
where we are now, you know.
Yeah, man. Like he, for me, when I think about what you were saying about when my big breaks and stuff came, he was such a key part of that, because he'd gone from Subtronics, started Samurai, and I knew him and stuff. But then, I think it was me and State of Mind he kind of picked up on in those first couple of releases on Samurai, and he also had great relationships with Clute and Marcus and Caliber and all that kind of,
just everybody
with everybody. Yeah, totally, man. So he's a huge part of the culture that we now have still, you know, like those guys started it, you know, well, you guys at the same time, you know.
Yeah. My first international, Josh and my first international releases were on Subtronics. You know, Jeff picked us up and put us out there on the fucking global stage, you know. Without that, we would have struggled for fucking time.
Man, he was a hard nut to crack. Going back to, you know, you had to make sure that your shit was correct, basically, you know.
On point.
Yeah, like he wouldn't be championing it any other way, you know. But then when he was doing the distribution stuff, I'd quite often get an email and he'd be like, "Hey, I've only got two test presses of this particular tune. But like a Dillinger tune or something. You're like, there's only 2 in the country." And you're like, the scramble to get those off him, it was classic, because everyone was after. I think Pat worked for him was in the office as well.
Yeah, Pat was working for him. So Pat had access to all the good tunes and, the promos and the test presses and shit like that as well. We were talking about, you know, our days in vinyl and all that sort of shit. It's like,
it was like currency,
geez,
almost, you know, like, if you get the biggest collections of dubs, then, you know, people are going to want to come and hear that shit, because where else are you going to hear it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. It used to cause beef, like, say I went overseas and came back with a big stack of dubs or promos or test presses and shit like that. Jeff wouldn't talk to me for a couple of weeks. You know what I mean? He'd let me go and play them out, I'd wear my dubs out, and then he'd be like, "Yeah, sweet, now what, you want some tunes off me, do you?"
Yeah, totally, man. I'd be like, do the little cheeky email. "Hey, bro, what's up? What are you up to?" Yeah, man.
Yeah, I mean, that's the point of this podcast as well, is like, you know, there's such a lot of work and the foundations that were laid in the 90s to really set.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like so freaking long ago. This is celebrating over 25 years of drum and bass and this podcast,
yeah,
you know what I mean?
crazy,
It's
man.
a long fucking time, bro. That's I saw Goldie last year celebrating 25 years of Timeless.
Oh, shit, yeah.
Now this year he's doing Saturn's Return. It's like,
and it's
holy
even back
shit,
then, it still
man.
had
Like,
the same. I suppose everyone was so nerdy and so into it. We weren't nerdy. That's not really what I'm getting at. But the everyone was so focused on drum and bass, on the culture of jungle music.
Yeah.
You know, like that. That was the if you were in it, you were fucking in it.
You were fucking well and truly.
You know?
You were right down to fucking wearing drum and bass undies.
Yeah,
you know
totally,
what I
man.
mean?
Jungless undies. But yeah, I mean, the new guys coming through, man. I love what they're doing, man. There's definitely a movement now. You hear drum and bass everywhere now, especially in New Zealand. But I think I feel like that's around the world. But definitely more so here. So when you look at what, you know, you hear them on ads, you hear it on, you know, the George. Just looking through those Georgie's nominations, are pretty much all drum and bass acts. You know, it's like,
which is good, and you know, like, it's awesome that those artists who give their time to George FM for free are getting recognition through that award platform. But I mean, at the same time, these drum and bass artists, they're actually, you know, they're doing more for George than George is doing for them.
Yeah, totally, man. I mean, that's the thing. There's such a movement, and the thing about it now, when I think it, like, you would have thought it would have. Like most things that sort of go up quickly and, you know, go down quickly, but it's just holding fast, man. Like, it's still huge.
Yeah, I think, like, Do you reckon it's the accessibility, or do you just think the music has changed to a point where it's so mainstream and so kind of palatable now that Joe Bloggs and his missus from fucking Henderson are in it, and they're at the gigs and they don't fucking care about the music per se, it's just they're out at a party? Or is it, do you reckon there's like actual devotees to drum and bass? Like, I'm not going to compare them to us because it's completely different time and kettle of fish, but do you reckon these people are devoted to the music or just going out and partying?
I think it's a bit of both, to be honest, man. The people that are really into it are really into it, just like we were. You know, like these young guys that come up and you talk to them at gigs and like, man, they know their shit. You know, like they're 24/7 in it, like we were. You know, like that. There's that, but I also think there's when you look at it, especially in New Zealand, like you could tour a rock band around New Zealand. I mean, say, like back in the day when it was always, say, Deftones would come to New Zealand and everyone would go out to see Deftones kind of thing, even though that's not a mainstream thing, but that's where you'd go. Those would be the things that were really special to go to. And I think now drum and bass has kind of become that kind of rock, sort of slightly to the left rock music, but it's kind of like what kind of grunge was, you know? Like what drum and bass is to electronic music is kind of what grunge was to rock music, you know? So I feel like it's that part of it's that movement, because I mean the shows are they're just still huge, you know, and like that's something we never would have thought would be. Would have always felt like it was going to be a side stage kind of thing.
Yeah, bro. Like honestly, I do feel some kind of way when I see fucking Spark Arena getting sold out to drum and bass. You know what I mean? It looks like holy fucking shit.
Yeah.
This is.
I did that Wilkinson tour, and I remember going to the Trust Arena show. Mate, it was absolutely ridiculous. Last time I'd been there was seeing Slayer and Anthrax.
Yeah,
you know, like fucking legends, man. And and then here we are, and this there were more people at the Wilkinson show than there were at that.
Jesus,
for sure.
Yeah,
it was just packed, rammed out. Production was amazing. You know, it was, and everyone was vibing. Man, you look around all the top seats, and everyone just on this kind of critical mass. Everyone was just all about it, and in the moment. And that I think that's kind of partly where it becomes infectious, because you just want to keep experiencing that, you know. And you used to probably get that from rock bands, you know?
Yeah, totally. And I think maybe, you know, the fact that there is access to the artists, you can see their Instagrams and you can go to their websites and check out what the future releases are and all that sort of shit. I think just that having that access to the information has definitely helped, you know, carry those new fans, because fuck man, sometimes it would be so disheartening having to wait months in between internationals coming out to play the latest tunes, you know what I mean? Whereas now you can just fucking tune into your favorite drum and bass DJ either hosting their own live stream or on a major radio station somewhere around the world, you know?
Yeah, totally, man. I think that's a big thing as well. I mean, that's the thing with the internationals now, the way that it's, I know it's a selling point for promoters that the internationals are there, but you know there is also the fact that we have internationals that live here too. You know, that's something that I have.
Yeah, totally.
It's not a chip on my shoulder about. Maybe some people think it is a chip on my shoulder, but I also think you got to kind of make, you know, if it wasn't for COVID, we'd still, you know, when State of Mind or Upbeats aren't in New Zealand, they're international. You know, the international thing
exactly.
I think gets a bit skewed because we're all on the same playing field. You know.
Yeah, I've said this before, like out of any music genre that's been exported from New Zealand bar pop, drum and bass is the biggest musical export, especially in dance music, whereas we've got more active artists touring around the world at any one time than any other genre in the country.
Yeah, bang on, man. Honestly, there's definitely a movement in that. And it's been that way for a while, you know. I always remember... I remember it was Shehard, I think, saying it years and years ago, going they never got taken seriously until they went to Europe. And then came home, and that's when they got taken seriously. You know, you're like, man, they'd already released Killjoy, and then they went and toured it in Europe. And I think they came back, and then they're just blown up. And it's because they'd been on tour with Faith No More or someone like that, you know?
Yeah, one of my biggest regrets when we started Bulletproof is that we solely focused on trying to make it big overseas. And during the time that we were doing that, and we were making tunes back here, but then I was away on tour. I'd be living in London for 3 or 4 months at a time, and then coming back and shit like that. During that time, the scene out in New Zealand had fucking blown up, and Concord Dawn were just killing it and crushing it with big tunes as well as playing all the gigs and shit. And so when we came back, it was kind of like we had to start again to get a foot in the door in New Zealand, because the scene moves so fast over here, you know?
Yeah, and that's the thing. I remember when Concord came in, they kind of bridged the gap, because even though Morning Light's like a big tear out Reese tune, but man, how much did that transcend
fucking
people?
everything? Totally.
Yeah, you know,
Totally.
like that really just sort of woke it up, I guess. You know, and the guys that you guys that have been doing it before as well. I still, and Concord had done before that. They'd done an album or two before that, maybe. Disturbance and that.
Totally.
But yeah, and so they were like, was it like called the Cog Crew and all that kind of thing, and so it was all still bubbling. But then it just took something like Morning Light to go bang, and then not long after that, Pendulum came along, and this is where I think digital as well is a massive part of why we've all kind of come up, and not necessarily because he's directly fed anything, but I just remember having conversations with him, you know, and he'd just give us just little sort of nuggets of advice.
Yeah, totally. And digital and Brillo really took an interest in the New Zealand scenes. Like, you know, they were distributing. We all went on timeless distribution once we lost our not ST Holdings, vinyl distribution.
Even Cell Dub
deal.
as well, eh? Didn't Cell?
Yeah. We all went on tour. Like, but yeah, I mean, those Steve Digital's definitely had such a massive role in New Zealand drum and bass production because he came out here so much during those early days, and I think it's the same kind of can be said for a lot of those early artists like Marcus Intellects, man. Like, for me personally, just as a guy, I don't know what it is. I just love people from Manchester, but his music as well. He was one of the guys that was like first to start giving me tunes on AOL Instant Messenger. I was able to cut them on dub because we had a dub plate cutting facility out here over on the North Shore and all that sort of shit. Old Joe Goubet with the old EMI desk from Abbey Road Studios in London that he flew out here and.
Epic.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest regrets I'll ever have is that Concord Dawn actually bought me Morning Light first for Cyanide Recordings, and Evan was like, kind of think this would fucking really suit your label, and I listened to it and I was like, nah.
And now you were like,
not my cup of tea, mate, not my cup of tea. It's just, it's too simple, you know what I mean? It's fucking, but then obviously...
Yeah, it smashed it though, but that's the thing, eh? It transcended it, and then you had Cell Dub obviously championing the sound with Tiki at the front of that, because he was doing tunes with Concord as well, and seeing the gigs, you know, and then Shapeshifter came up, you know, and who are all drum and bass boys as well. Yeah. You know, Charlie was out doing Ronnie Size stuff. Like, honestly, at that time, everything was all over it, man. It was crazy.
It was happening, man. And like, we were looking at Charlie as well. You know? Yeah, it was mates. Yeah, we're all friends. We're all just like... Yeah, I don't think I could ever look back and go, I looked at someone with jealousy or anything like that when they were doing well, because when you were doing well, we were all doing well. Yeah,
absolutely. That's the thing I think is a big strength as to why we're still going, you know, like, and how it's sort of just, it's never really faltered, apart from the old little one.
If you could put a bet down, where do you see the scene in 6 months to a year's time?
Man, you know what, I would have probably taken that bet just before COVID and said I would probably sort of blow out of it. But man, it's kind of, I just can't, it's hard to see where it's going to tip. There's nothing else that I can see. I mean, obviously my radar is pretty focused on drum and bass, but I don't know where it's going, man. To me, I always think something's got to give. This is the way things go. You don't, it's not like it's going to be here for 20 years like this, you know, but mate, at the moment, I wouldn't put money against it either. You know?
It's a fucking tough one because, you know, like, you would hope that the strength of the scene right now has actually created the next generation of producers, the next generation of promoters, the next generation of music bloggers and people who know about the music and represent it in New Zealand, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and that's the thing. Like, it goes out to promoters. Is the bloggers, the people, the social media stuff. You know, it's all over the place, man. It's quite crazy, you know. And so where does it end? Well, I don't think it'll ever end. Like with anything, there's still an underground, and I think, you know, nothing becomes successful without that. You've always got to have something that it's built on top of, you know. So to me, that will always exist. How long it will keep going at this top end of everything, who knows, man. That's up to the artists pushing the sound.
Yeah,
because
totally.
You know, once something gets stale, that's when it's going to be a problem.
Well, I'm just hoping that, you know, this lockdown doesn't last too long. Like, Pat's really fucking, he's worried that this is going to go right through till December sort of thing, like the rollout of letting people go back into gigs and fucking not having to, you know, socially distance and all that sort of shit. But I don't know if that I don't know if the scene would be able to fucking take a stretch that long.
I think we're going back to the new guys. I think, and the way that say if that happens, I guess it will still remain buoyant because everyone will find a way to tell people what they're up to.
Yeah,
And
totally.
so, I mean, Lee Matthews guys are great at that. You know, that social media game, it's basically, it will just be in a holding pattern. But then I suppose the fortunate thing is that the people involved and those, you know, these newer guys coming through, they're really onto that. So they will make sure things, just out of just the way they roll, you know, it will still be present until whatever time it is that we can come out of it. You know, I'm pretty hopeful that we're going to be out of this a bit quicker.
And new generation, if you're listening, Trei has just issued you a task, and there it is. Carry the flag forward, go well, and make sure that New Zealand survives this second fucking lockdown, and we can come out. We can come out for summertime, and we get to see all of our fucking favorite artists on stage, absolutely killing it as per usual. And Trev, bruv, it's always a pleasure, bro. And
Andrew, my man, Andrew.
I can't wait till we cross paths and get to have a nice beersy and fucking give each other a man hug and high five. And
awesome, bro. Oh, it's been great to catch up, bro. It's been awesome.
Best of luck, bro, and give my love to Gina and the whānau. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down and hang out, and I'm going to come and party with you guys once we're out of
do it,
lockdown.
man. Do it. Always welcome, my man.
Hawke's Base, here I come. Boom.
Yeah, bro. Awesome,
There you
brother.
go. That is another episode of the History of New Zealand Drum and Bass podcast. We'll catch you soon.
You've been listening to the History of New Zealand Drum and Bass series. For episode schedules and podcast information, follow us at NZDMB Podcast on Facebook and Instagram, with new episodes weekly on all major podcasting platforms. This is the History of New Zealand Drum and Bass.